You have always mistaken your suffering for sanctity. You believe that by absorbing the pain of others, you were fulfilling some divine role, perhaps even achieving a higher spiritual frequency. But what if I told you that your forgiveness, endlessly given and seldom earned, was not a sign of strength but a symptom of unconscious bondage? The empath, as we name this archetype, is not born from light but from injury. It is the child who learned to monitor the emotional climate of others in order to survive. It is the daughter who read her mother's silence like a prophecy. The son who deciphered his father's rage like sacred scripture. This sensitivity was not a gift bestowed. It was a survival mechanism evolved in the shadows of unpredictable affection. And so the empath grew, fragile in their strength, radiant in their wound. But here lies the danger. Empaths often conflate love with self-erasure. They offer forgiveness like a sacrament, even to those who violate the soul. Why? Because deep in the unconscious, there is a terrifying belief that if they cease forgiving, they will cease being loved. They fear rejection not just of the other, but of the self that was forged in pleasing the other. So, they forgive the narcissist, the abuser, the betrayer. They make excuses for the mask wearer. And in doing so they forget that they too are wearing one. A mask called peace. A mask called compassion. A mask that hides the rage of the abandoned child within. But there comes a sacred rupture, a moment of reckoning when the empath stops forgiving, when the soul, exhausted from turning the other cheek, turns inward instead. This is not an act of vengeance, but of awakening. It is the threshold of individuation, the point at which the false self begins to crack and the authentic self whispers through the fractures. At that moment masks fall. Not just those of the others but your own. And what you see in the rubble is terrifying. You see how your empathy has been weaponized against you, how your light has been siphoned to feed the shadows of others. You see the truth. You were too kind to speak and too frightened to admit that not everyone who needed you was worthy of you. When the empath stops forgiving, they begin remembering. Remembering the moments they swallowed truth to keep the peace. Remembering the times they apologized for things that wounded them just to maintain connection. They recall, not with bitterness but with brutal clarity, how they betrayed themselves in the name of harmony. And they weep not for the other, but for the self they abandoned at the altar of approval. But this grief is sacred. It is alchemical fire that burns the false persona and forges the soul in gold. Do not mistake this fire for cruelty. When you stop forgiving those who refuse to change, you are not becoming cold, you are becoming conscious. You are no longer participating in the grand illusion of projection, where the empath sees the wounded child in the predator and believes they can mother it into light. This is not love. It is enchantment masquerading as compassion. It is the archetype of the mother fused with the illusion of the savior. It is a complex born from the fear of abandonment and fueled by unconscious guilt. But the psyche longs for balance. And so, in dream after dream, the unconscious sends messages. Wolves wearing the face of lovers, broken clocks that bleed, houses with locked rooms you never enter. These are not just symbols. They are psychic alarms, warnings from the self that your forgiveness has become a prison, that your mercy, unchecked by discernment, is spiritual self-harm. When the empath finally heeds the message, they step into the terrifying realm of shadow work. Here they encounter the rage they buried beneath kindness, the resentment that simmered under their smiles, the truth they feared would make them unlovable. And here is where the miracle begins. Because in embracing that shadow, the empath reclaims their sovereignty. They no longer seek redemption in the eyes of the other. They see clearly the mask of the wounded manipulator, the predator cloaked in praise, the vampire cloaked in charm. And they speak not with fury but with finality. They say no. They say leave. They say, I see you. And when they do, the masks fall because the spell is broken. The performance ends when the audience walks away. The narcissist cannot mirror what you refuse to project. The manipulator cannot twist what you no longer hide. Your clarity becomes their unmasking. Your truth becomes their undoing. The power you gave away in the form of forgiveness returns to you in the form of boundaries. But there is grief here too. Because once the masks fall, the fantasy dies. You must mourn the illusion, the version of them you believed in, the potential you fell in love with, the promise that never came. You must bury the idea that your love could fix them. And in that burial, something unexpected occurs. Your soul resurrects. This is individuation. This is the path the mystics walked. The prophets burned for it. It is the death of the false self and the birth of the inner sovereign. And it begins not with light, but with a refusal to betray your own darkness. I have said before, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath who stops forgiving is not becoming evil. They are becoming whole. They are integrating the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress. And in doing so they become terrifying, not because they harm but because they no longer tolerate harm. They are no longer emotionally available to those who feed on empathy without offering accountability. They are no longer psychic food for the unhealed. This frightens those who depended on their silence. But this is the cost of wholeness. To walk away from false peace. To choose inner truth over outer harmony. To become the mirror that reflects the unspoken, the unsaid, the unseen. Let us go deeper. In the collective unconscious, there exists an archetype called the divine child. This child represents the true self, the undamaged, radiant, intuitive core of being. For many empaths, this divine child was exiled early. In its place, the pleaser was born, the healer, the listener. These are noble masks, but masks nonetheless. They serve a purpose in the trauma matrix, but they are not the face of the soul. When the empath stops forgiving, they begin searching for this lost child. They journey inward through layers of pain, betrayal, and identity confusion. They descend into the underworld of the psyche, guided not by light but by longing. And there, beneath the rubble of false forgiveness, they find her, the radiant, furious, untamed self. She does not beg. She does not shrink. She remembers everything. And in her eyes, you see your original power. The power that does not need to be earned by pleasing. The power that does not depend on being good. It simply is. This moment, this reunion is true healing. Because it is here you realize, forgiveness was never your duty. It was your delay. It postponed your reckoning with your own truth. It kept you circling the wound instead of cleansing it. But now the wound is ready. It has fed long enough. Your refusal to forgive the unforgivable is the scalpel. Your rage is the antiseptic. Your grief is the baptism. And you emerge not as the empath who absorbs, but as the mystic who transfigures. You no longer forgive in order to keep the peace. You forgive when the soul is ready, when the wound has spoken, when the truth has been honored, not a moment sooner. This is divine timing, not emotional obligation. The psyche heals on its own clock. Those who demand your forgiveness on their terms are not seeking reconciliation. They are seeking control. Let them fall. Let every mask shatter. Let the silence speak the truth your compassion once concealed. Because when you stop forgiving what should never have been endured, you stop betraying the sacred within you. You begin to hear again the voice of the inner God, the whisper of your ancestors, the truth in your bones. It says, you were never meant to be food for their shadows. You were meant to bring light to your own. And once you begin to honor your own light, something astonishing happens. The world rearranges itself around your new frequency. What once sought to feed on your silence now trembles in the face of your sovereignty. The same people who once leaned on your kindness now accuse you of cruelty. Not because you are cruel, but because you no longer allow them to drink from a well they never helped fill. This is the sacred price of awakening, to be misunderstood by those still dreaming. Let them sleep. You are not here to keep their illusions intact. You are here to embody truth. And truth, though healing, is not always gentle. The empath who stops forgiving becomes a mirror the world cannot look away from. In your eyes, the liar sees his deception. In your stillness, the manipulator hears the echo of his own hunger. In your refusal to excuse the inexcusable, you force the world to feel what you once absorbed. You no longer metabolize the emotions of others. You return them, not with vengeance but with clarity. This clarity is sacred. It is the sword of the psyche, the blade that cuts through projection and illusion. It is the voice that says, "No more," not out of rage but out of reverence for the self. And in that reverence you find something far more profound than forgiveness. You find alignment. Alignment with a deeper self, with a silent knowing that has always dwelled beneath your need to please. The part of you that watched carefully as you gave chance after chance to those who never changed. The part of you that held its breath every time you betrayed your own boundaries. That self is no longer whispering. It is roaring. Because it remembers what you forgot. That your energy is sacred. That your body is an altar. That your presence is not a gift to be squandered by the unworthy. This is what the world calls your change. But it is not change. It is return. Return to essence. Return to center. Return to the truth that predates every mask you wore to survive. And as you return, you begin to see the archetypes clearly. The vampire who feeds on emotional labor disguised as need. The false prophet who weaponizes your hope to extract devotion. The eternal child who demands rescue without responsibility. You once forgave these roles endlessly because you saw the hurt behind the mask. But now you understand. Seeing their pain does not obligate you to suffer with them. Compassion without discernment is self-abandonment. And the empath who wakes up must make a sacred vow, not to stop loving but to stop leaking. Because leaking love into bottomless wells is not generosity. It is martyrdom. It is the shadow of the savior complex, an archetype born when the child believes their worth is measured by how much they can heal in others what remains broken in themselves. But you are not a wound mender. You are a light bearer. And light does not repair the darkness. It reveals it. This is your new role, not to fix but to reflect, not to absorb but to illuminate, not to forgive recklessly but to bless wisely. And here, in this clarity, you begin to forgive for the right reason. Not to keep the connection but to release the chain. Not to deny the pain but to bless the lesson. You no longer forgive to forget. You forgive to remember who you are beyond the hurt. And sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. Sometimes it is simply the way you walk away without ceremony, without explanation, without offering another piece of your heart as a parting gift. Because you now know, those who deserved your love never needed your forgiveness. And those who demanded forgiveness never truly loved you. This revelation shatters every false belief. It ruptures the myth that says love means sacrifice without end, that healing requires self-erasure, that boundaries are unspiritual. These are lies, echoes of a culture that reveres the empath only when they are silent, compliant, and bleeding for others. You will not bleed anymore. The blood has already been shed. It watered the soil of your awakening. It baptized the roots of your sovereignty. Now you bloom not in spite of your pain but because of it. Because every betrayal was a mirror. Every wound a doorway. Every silence a teacher. And in the end, the greatest forgiveness you offer is not to them but to yourself. You forgive yourself for mistaking trauma for destiny, for calling emotional starvation unconditional love, for confusing projection with prophecy. You forgive yourself for the years you stayed, for the nights you swallowed your voice, for the smiles that hid your screams. And in that self-forgiveness, a miracle unfolds. The masks fall from your own face. You see yourself not as the empath, not as the fixer, not as the forgiver, but as the sovereign soul who endured enough illusion to finally remember the truth. And the truth is this: you never needed their approval. You never needed their love. You never needed to be understood. You only ever needed to remember that your soul is not here to serve the shadows of others. It is here to shine, to speak, to walk in truth, even when the world demands your silence. And if that truth frightens them, so be it. Let every false connection fall. Let every unearned bond break. Let every mask shatter in the light of your becoming. Because the empath who stops forgiving becomes something dangerous, not to others but to every system built on control, guilt, and emotional debt. You become a rebel in the soul's revolution, a prophet of the sacred no, a lighthouse for those still drowning in codependency. And in your presence, others begin to awaken. Not because you save them but because you stop shielding them from the truth. And the truth, when spoken with clarity and compassion, does not destroy. It liberates. So speak it. Even if your voice shakes. Even if they leave. Even if you stand alone. Because the self has waited lifetimes for this moment. To be seen, to be heard, to be obeyed. And when you finally obey your soul more than the stories you were taught, the masks fall not only from others, but from existence itself. You begin to see clearly the patterns, the illusions, the ancestral scripts. You stop dancing the trauma choreography passed down through generations. You burn the roles. You write new ones, not from pain but from power, not from fear but from freedom. This is what I meant when I said that individuation is not a path of comfort. It is a path of fire. It scorches every lie you've mistaken for love. It incinerates every apology you made for your own truth. And it leaves behind only what is real. You unmasked, unyielding, unforgiving, not in spite but in sacred clarity. This is the paradox. That when you stop forgiving in the way the world demands, you finally touch the true forgiveness the soul has been aching for. Not the forgiveness that binds you to the one who hurt you, but the forgiveness that sets you free. There is an ancient knowledge that returns to you the moment you stop performing love. This knowledge does not arrive in words. It arrives in symbols, in dreams, in the mysterious language of the unconscious. The soul speaks not in sentences but in images. And when the empath seizes the compulsion to forgive as a survival tactic, the psyche begins to speak louder than ever before. You start to dream of keys and locked doors, of bridges collapsing behind you, of mirrors that show not faces but flames. These are not arbitrary. They are revelations. The locked door is the boundary you never claimed. The collapsing bridge is a connection you can no longer maintain. The burning mirror is the illusion of self-sacrifice melting into truth. Every dream becomes a message from the deeper self, a psychic telegram saying, "It is time. Come home to yourself." But what is the self truly? It is not your story. It is not your trauma. It is not your role as the compassionate one, the understanding one, the one who always stays. The self is the eternal archetype of wholeness. It contains all polarities, love and wrath, silence and sound, light and shadow. It is what you were before you learned to fragment yourself to be safe. It is the you that remembers your sacred anger and your holy discernment. The you that knows boundaries are not walls, they are altars. You begin to rebuild your inner temple not from apologies but from truth. Not with forgiveness but with fire. The empath, when awakened, becomes a guardian. You no longer open your gates to every energy that knocks. You become deliberate. You sense when someone is speaking from the mask or the soul, and you no longer entertain the former no matter how sweet their words. You are not seduced by stories of sorrow anymore. You see the difference between wounds and weapons. You once forgave because you saw the pain behind the cruelty. Now you ask, what is that pain doing to me? This is a sacred shift. You are no longer a sponge. You are a mirror. The sponge absorbs the poison of others and calls it purpose. The mirror reflects the truth without losing its shape. And the truth is, many people only loved your weakness. They felt strong when you were quiet, useful when you were soft, godlike when you were endlessly forgiving. But now your strength is an affront to their illusions. Your no feels like a thunderclap. Your silence feels like exile. And that is not your burden to carry. It is their reckoning. You are not cruel for becoming discerning. You are not cold for walking away from one-sided intimacy. You are not broken for no longer offering yourself as an emotional bandage. You are becoming real. And in the realm of the real, everything false must fall. That includes the fantasy that you could love someone into healing. You can't. Healing is not a product of proximity. It is a product of personal choice. And so many empaths stay in toxic dynamics because they see potential. But potential is not a promise. It is a projection. It is the image your soul paints over the wound of another, hoping that your light will be enough to pull them into their own. But light cannot do the work for them. It can only reveal the way. You are not the way. You are the reminder. You are not the healer. You are the reflection. And when you finally stop forgiving what must be faced, you give others the gift of their own darkness. You stop intercepting their karma. You stop delaying their lessons. You stop confusing your guilt with your guidance. And this is where the real power lives. Because in this clarity, you begin to understand forgiveness from a deeper plane. Not as a transaction, not as a performance, but as a release. Forgiveness does not mean reunion. It does not mean silence. It does not mean pretending the wound never happened. Real forgiveness burns. It sees through illusion and leaves only truth. And the truth is that some people were not meant to stay. Some were meant to crack your heart open so your soul could rise through the fracture. Do not grieve their absence. Honor their function. They were initiators, not beloveds. They were catalysts, not companions. And the empath, when awakened, stops trying to make trauma into romance. You no longer fall for the broken bird who bites your hand. You no longer stay in places where your silence is currency. You no longer accept crumbs and call it grace. You have tasted truth. Now you have knelt before your own rage. You have wept into the arms of your own shadow. You no longer fear solitude. You fear self-abandonment more. So when someone asks, "Why can't you just forgive me?" you answer with sacred honesty, because forgiveness is not mine to give. It is yours to earn. And if they cannot hold the weight of your boundaries, they never deserve the warmth of your empathy. Let them fall. Let them label you as harsh, unforgiving, arrogant. Let the narratives twist, because the truth cannot be tarnished by perception. You are not who they remember. You are who you have reclaimed. And your reclamation is holy. It is the return of the sacred no, the reappearance of the buried self, the awakening of the divine mirror who reflects without apology. This is not bitterness. This is resurrection. You no longer carry the cross of everyone else's redemption. You let them meet their own reflection. You stop being the detour from their accountability. You become the altar where only truth is allowed to kneel. And yes, the path gets lonelier before it gets lighter. You will lose many who fed off the version of you that was always available, always agreeable, always in emotional debt. But what you gain is priceless. Yourself, unmasked, unmoved, unbreakable. And in that stillness, in that clarity, in that radiant sovereignty, the right ones come. The ones who don't need you to be weak to feel strong. The ones who see your light and bow to it, not harvest it. The ones who come not to take, but to co-create. And you know them by how your nervous system rests in their presence. By how your intuition expands, not shrinks. By how truth flows between you like an unfiltered stream. This is the reward of sacred clarity, not peace with everyone, but peace with yourself. And in that peace, you discover something deeper than forgiveness. You discover self-loyalty. And self-loyalty, dear soul, is the final stage of healing. Self-loyalty is the vow you make to never abandon your truth again. It is the quiet but mighty covenant with the self, forged not in moments of triumph, but in the raw aftermath of betrayal. You do not arrive at this place of wholeness by chance. You arrive because your soul was broken open again and again until it remembered its original shape. And that shape was never built to carry the weight of everyone's unhealed wounds. It was built to reflect the divine. You who were once the empath pleading for peace, now become the mystic who knows that peace does not come from external validation. It emerges from internal alignment. You begin to realize that some of the deepest forgiveness you will ever experience is a forgiveness of your own complicity in your suffering, not as blame but as awakening. You see how you stayed in places that asked you to shrink, how you silenced yourself in relationships that fed on your suppression. You acknowledge your role not to shame yourself but to free yourself. Because awareness is liberation. And liberation is not painless. To become free, you must let every illusion burn. You must look in the mirror and admit that you built connections on hope, not reality, that you gave your loyalty to masks, not souls, that you confused consistency with love. And in doing so, you stopped loving yourself. That is the wound beneath the wound. The one that forgiveness cannot touch. Only self-honesty can. But when you touch it, when you finally say, "I see you," to your own abandoned self, a tectonic shift unfolds. The psyche rearranges. The shadow integrates. The mask drops. And the soul begins to pulse with something ancient and electric. It is not empathy. It is not even forgiveness. It is presence, pure, unapologetic, sovereign presence. You begin to live from the center instead of the edges, from the core instead of the cracks. And that presence becomes your new language. You speak less but say more. You do less but impact more. You give less but everything you give is sacred, no longer diluted by fear. Your love becomes a fire that only the courageous can hold. And many will not. They will call you distant. They will call you selfish. They will call you changed. And they will be right. You are changed. But not in the way they think. You did not become hard. You became whole. You did not become cruel. You became clear. You did not stop loving. You stopped lying, to them, to yourself, to the illusion that empathy means erasure. It never did. Empathy is not the river in which you drown. It is the cup from which you offer when your own well is full. Anything less is not empathy. It is self-abandonment disguised as love. And the world does not need more abandoned selves. It needs embodied souls. The empath who stops forgiving becomes this embodiment. You become the one who walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not because you are agreeable but because you are authentic. You are no longer the emotional sponge. You are the emotional compass. Your presence makes the masks fall because your energy no longer entertains them. And the world, unaccustomed to truth without apology, will resist. It will push back. It will try to seduce you into old patterns with flattery, guilt, shame. But you no longer dance for breadcrumbs. You feast on truth. You drink from the well of your own knowing. And in that knowing, the most powerful healing unfolds, not just for you but for those around you. Because when you refuse to participate in dysfunction, you expose it. When you refuse to absorb someone's rage, they are left to feel it. When you say no with sacred calm, you invite others to meet themselves. That it needs embodied souls. The empath who stops forgiving becomes this embodiment. You become the one who walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not because you are agreeable but because you are authentic. You are no longer the emotional sponge. You are the emotional compass. Your presence makes the masks fall because your energy no longer entertains them. And the world, unaccustomed to truth without apology, will resist. It will push back. It will try to seduce you into old patterns with flattery, guilt, shame. But you no longer dance for breadcrumbs. You feast on truth. You drink from the well of your own knowing. And in that knowing, the most powerful healing unfolds, not just for you but for those around you. Because when you refuse to participate in dysfunction, you expose it. When you refuse to absorb someone's rage, they are left to feel it. When you say no with sacred calm, you invite others to meet themselves. This is what healing truly is, not fixing others but becoming so whole that your presence is medicine, so honest that your silence is a sermon, so sovereign that your no is a mirror in which others finally see their patterns. You are not a forgiver anymore. You are a revealer. And revelation is the beginning of transformation. But let us speak of grief again. For it is the final gate. You will grieve what you lose when you stop forgiving everyone. You will grieve the versions of yourself that kept the peace at all costs. You will grieve the relationships built on unspoken resentment. You will grieve the mask that once made you lovable to the emotionally unavailable. Let the grief come. Do not resist it. Grief is the echo of detachment. It means you loved. It means you stayed too long. It means you hoped. And now it means you are free. Free to love in a new way. not as currency, not as performance, but as essence. You love now because you are full, not because you are afraid. You give now from overflow, not obligation. You serve now from truth, not trauma. And that love, clear, fierce, untainted by guilt, is the love the world has forgotten. The love the wounded cannot manipulate. The love that says, I will not carry your shadow for you, but I will stand in mine while you meet yours. This is what the empath becomes when they awaken. Not softer but stronger, not louder but wiser, not forgiving everyone but loyal to the self that no longer needs to. So let the masks fall. Let the narratives collapse. Let the ones who fed on your weakness call you hard. Let them grieve the version of you that made their denial comfortable. Because you have awakened. You have remembered. You have returned. And in your return, the world becomes a little more honest, a little more whole, a little more sacred. So I leave you not with advice but with a reminder. You are not here to be understood by the unhealed. You are not here to make yourself small so others feel tall. You are not here to forgive what broke your soul into silence. You are here to become what you were before the world asked you to forget. You are here to burn, to blaze, to walk through the fire of your own awakening and emerge with nothing false left on your skin. This is what healing truly is, not fixing others but becoming so whole that your presence is medicine, so honest that your silence is a sermon, so sovereign that your no is a mirror in which others finally see their patterns. You are not a forgiver anymore. You are a revealer. And revelation is the beginning of transformation. But let us speak of grief again. For it is the final gate. You will grieve what you lose when you stop forgiving everyone. You will grieve the versions of yourself that kept the peace at all costs. You will grieve the relationships built on unspoken resentment. You will grieve the mask that once made you lovable to the emotionally unavailable. Let the grief come. Do not resist it. Grief is the echo of detachment. It means you loved. It means you stayed too long. It means you hoped. And now it means you are free. Free to love in a new way. Not as currency. Not as performance. But as essence. You love now because you are full, not because you are afraid. You give now from overflow, not obligation. You serve now from truth, not trauma. And that love, clear, fierce, untainted by guilt, is the love the world has forgotten. The love the wounded cannot manipulate. The love that says, I will not carry your shadow for you, but I will stand in mine while you meet yours. This is what the empath becomes when they awaken. Not softer but stronger, not louder but wiser, not forgiving everyone but loyal to the self that no longer needs to. So let the masks fall. Let the narratives collapse. Let the ones who fed on your weakness call you hard. Let them grieve the version of you that made their denial comfortable. Because you have awakened. You have remembered. You have returned. And in your return, the world becomes a little more honest, a little more whole, a little more sacred. So I leave you not with advice but with a reminder. You are not here to be understood by the unhealed. You are not here to make yourself small so others feel tall. You are not here to forgive what broke your soul into silence. You are here to become what you were before the world asked you to forget. You are here to burn, to blaze, to walk through the fire of your own awakening and emerge with nothing false left on your skin. Because when the empath stops forgiving, the soul begins speaking. And the masks fall, not as punishment but as prophecy fulfilled, as the sacred unraveling of illusion, as the beginning of truth, and as the return of you.